Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But for those who are able to and eventually come to understand where they're going, there is this breakthrough into the emergence of the real self, which is not the ego, but the soul, the spiritual depth of the person, which then again seeks further identity and comes to, if they're really willing to pay the price, come to a unitive and transcendent understanding of the self. Each of these is accompanied by a kind of surrender. Every single one of them. From the in utero experience, the mother's body simply takes over. And both she and the child really do have to surrender to the rhythms of life that are squeezing the baby out. And then in the formation of an ego, we remain surrendered to our environment. To come to a spiritual understanding, there's a surrender of the dominance of the little self screaming, me, me, me. If that's to be transcended and we're to come out of kind of the religious ghetto into a larger understanding, there's a surrender again of the safety and the comfort of that into something larger. And then finally there is the full-blown surrender into a unitive and transcendent understanding of oneself as a dimension of the divine self. And the divine self, the divine child, is present and developing all the way along. Sadly, many people stop here, most stop here, and that's why Jesus said, many are called, but few are chosen. That's why he says those words. Okay, so why don't we begin? You want to begin with meditation, or you want to just go into it tonight? And the sense of Christ Logos is present in the seed state right from the beginning, right from the conception moment. So, from there, you're going to read the whole Magnificat, and then we'll do the exegesis. Are we on? Okay.
Before I read the Magnificat, I want to just explain that I was not brought up a Catholic, and so when I became a Catholic at 26, one of the things I loved most about religion was the relationship with Mary. And so my understanding of Mary, I think I'm very fortunate in a way because I don't have any religious training. I grew up in the Church of England, and Mary is a figure, but she's not a central figure. And so when I was first married and pregnant, I developed a relationship of prayer and devotion to Mary that was really my imagination of who she was. And I had this sense that this was a young Jewish girl who grew up in a culture where there was this longing, for the Messiah. And that because of her heightened sensitivity or her own devotional practice, she opened to that in a very unusual way. There's two ways we can look at it. Either God chose her from the beginning, but I like to think that we all have a choice in being open to God. And Mary, as this young girl, just really felt her people suffering and longed and longed and longed for this Messiah. And was so open that, in fact, God was able to take root in her body, not just her soul, in her body. So that's what I like to think of when I think of Mary. So it's a little different than the Mary of the statues and the Mary, Mother of God with the stars. And, I like to picture this just ordinary young woman who was so willing and open that something marvelous happened to her. So as Albert said, she says before she proclaims this Magnificat, the angel comes and she hears what is to happen to her. she sets out to see her cousin Elizabeth. And I like to think that this journey was not just to go and help Elizabeth, but actually to go somewhere where she could be affirmed herself and have protection and safety, because she was an unmarried woman who found herself pregnant. And how do you explain that to your parents, to your society? So she gets to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth recognizes right away what has happened. And Mary says this: "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever."
So now what we're going to do is we're going to break down the prayer as I did in the book and interact with the meanings that I articulated in the book. And we're going to go back and forth, paragraph for paragraph, and they seem to line up perfectly for the topics that each of us wanted to talk about. So the prayer begins, "My soul magnifies the Lord." And in the book I said, any who have truly surrendered the little egoic self experience in the wake of that surrender a profound magnification of joy and expansion of consciousness and being. The egoic self then seems a cramped prison for the soul. With the surrender and subsequent shattering of the small self, we feel like Lazarus walking out of his tomb. We enter into an experience of expansion coextensive with life, with earth, and with the universe. Buddhists call this experience Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, my soul and the soul of the universe are one soul. Mary's soul felt the magnification of her soul in that way. Suddenly, she embodied the Christ Logos who had created her. What a strange and mysterious thing. So if we go back to all that we've talked about over the last 2 years, this oneness of the self with that which is informing and present ubiquitously throughout the universe, then what really happened there was the Christ Logos, in her yearning for God, in her longing for the Messiah, took on flesh. Took on flesh. And there's the root of the Eucharist, that miraculous ability for something as simple as bread and wine to exhibit the very presence of God for us to ingest and then utilize in a creative way. So she comes out. When I'm talking about Lazarus in the tomb, those of you who are familiar with the imagery, he's all wrapped up in the bandages of the dead. And he comes out almost like in a straitjacket, and Jesus says, unbind him. And he's literally unwrapped, and we can think of that as the unbinding of the egoic self, having the surrender experience, let it be done to me according to thy word, that surrender experience opens up the truth of the universe-sized interior, and we burn away that egoic self as we move up to a further and further and further understanding of our own divineness and our divine self, and at the same time being further and further and further unbound from the limitations of the ego. It's not that the ego goes away, it's that the ego no longer separates us. That the unitive dimension of who we are is so powerful and so present that the egoic self, while still there, there's the Albert LaChance identity, the Marilyn Weir, Carol, so forth, there's that identity that's still there, but it is no longer being served. It now serves the larger truth, the unitive identity of the divine self. So, with my spirit.
So I'm going to talk about my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, but before I read the paragraph, I think it's Eckhart Tolle that says, I know I read it last year or two, that true joy comes from inside us, and it's an upwelling from the inside, but nobody from the outside can give us joy. And I would have to say that's my experience. And one of the feminine principles that I read a woman called Mary Woodman years ago. She's a psychologist, and she talked a lot about presence and how powerful it is for women in particular to learn how to be fully present to the moment and in relationship. And I think that was Mary's gift, that she was able to be there whatever was happening. So she has this, incredible thing happen to her. She journeys to Elizabeth, and I like to think that she was really scared and questioning and not altogether in her blue robe, and that when Elizabeth, this older woman who was part of her kin, part of her family, greeted her with the knowledge of what had happened to her, that she was able to let go of all that fear, and this joy just came bubbling up, and she said this prayer to Elizabeth as a way to just, let all that joy come up. So my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, that she is just at this moment filled with joy. I mean, there will be hardship to come, as we know. But in that moment of having said yes, and then having a confirmation, the visitation, that these two women come together and say, yes, this is true, that this huge joy is present in her for a few moments. And I know from my own experience that that kind of presence that leads to joy can only come to pass if I'm quiet enough. My mother's been here, and I had 5 days where I just been running. And when she left, I felt so discombobulated, irritated, and it's just because it's so hard for me to stay present. And so, yesterday and today, I just had to slow back down. And then I can experience joy from inside out. We had a wonderful time, we did wonderful things. It's not that I wasn't happy, but that inner joy seems to only come, for me, from that connection to myself.
just recently, we were talking about that line from Eliot, the wonder that I feel is easy, and ease is cause of wonder. It comes from the four quartets. And it is not possible to have that abundant overflow of love without the quietude in order to be in a state of realization of one's divinity. Because the presence that you're talking about is the presence of God. It's not like they're two different things, like, I'm present as this personality. In awakening and in growing in unity of understanding, the presence, my presence, is the presence of the divine self that I am in my depth, which is the presence of the larger truth of the whole. So for me, I'm more and more and more unwilling to not be quiet. My days are really spent in silence. I meditate, pray, study, and read, and write, and that's all I do. And I find it harder and harder and harder to do much more than that with much of my day. Obviously, it doesn't mean that, I don't come out. I mean, here I am. And every so often I sneak out of my study and I show up someplace else. But the point is that I become more and more reluctant to not be in the place of realization, because there's nothing really that's more pleasant than that. Nothing.
The paragraph. And my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. Until one has experienced surrender, it is difficult, if not impossible, to imagine the upwelling of joy in the interior of oneself, just released from the prison of being a self-image. One experiences the expansive wonder of who we really are. Mary reports that in the magnification of her soul, she felt saved. Saved from what? From the lifelong prison of a miserable and shrunken existence. Unfortunately, most people accept that misery as being without an option. Mary's option was to embody God. Ours is the same.
Yeah, I can't, and that's what happens. To close back down into the egoic self, you get a sense of the deep unhappiness that derives from trying to derive happiness from the egoic self, by whatever exterior methodologies you use. There is always a misery and a feeling of being cheated that follows the attempt to serve the ego over and over and over. But as soon as we become willing to be the womb, male or female, doesn't matter in this case, as we become willing to be pregnant with that deeper self, that divine self, then suddenly real satisfaction dawns on the scene, and a person can achieve the joy that Jesus was talking about, that the world can't give or take away. There's this deep sense of the bread of life, the real bread of life. Surely, from now on, all generations will call me blessed or blessed. What greater blessing could one receive than pregnancy of any kind, let alone to be the mother of eternity itself? Any pregnancy, human or animal, is just that, mothering eternity. But what could it have meant to embody the incarnate author of the universe that you yourself are an expression of? and to know it. Every act of eating, drinking, and breathing brought to the developing child the planetary nutrients created by him, which were now creating her. Created by him, that were now creating him, his body. Now, the pregnancy involved here is, again, not only a female pregnancy. Each of us bears the divine child. Bethlehem means breadbasket. It's really what it means. So in the Bethlehem of ourselves, we experience the emergence of this divine child. And then from that point, in the realization that what we are at our death is that divine child. Not that we're like it or sort of like it, or we are the presence of that divinity. Then every action of our life begins to be focused on that, not on the egoic self as in selfishness, but arranging one's life in such a way that we embody that life to the very best of our ability and regardless of the cost. Regardless of the cost. We simply arrange things to give that gestation the time it needs. And the great spiritual teachers that I read, all of them warn about allowing certain people near you during that time. That there are people that really do have to be kept away, however unchristian that might seem. Those who seriously upset, those who seriously threaten, those who are overbearing, those who are vampires on the energy that's emerging in you. I used to use this term in my counseling work, libido vampires. People who don't have their own energy and who live on the side of your neck and take from you that which is necessary for the growth of the divine child, because it's only as the child grows within that you have what is to be given away to others. That's when once the gestation is complete, then the giving begins. But up until then, one must take responsibility, as any good mother would, to keep a certain barrier around the growing child and to be in the midst of those who really do get it. And in the mystical awakening, they're few and far between. There are not that many people who even want to awaken, let alone those who actually do awaken. So this is, in terms of the actual pregnancies, in terms of the actual embodiment, this is the grounding root for an ecology of the womb, where we're even politically, let alone ecclesially, focused on that which provides the best context for the future, for that which gives to our unborn, unconceived children the best possibility for growth and development. So there's an ecology there. Every act of eating, drinking, and breathing brought to the developing child the planetary nutrients created by him that were now creating him. Can you imagine if these themes were unpacked at every pulpit in a way that the culture was able to draw the young people to itself, the Christian establishment in all of its various expressions, to draw the young people to itself because we're actually addressing the issues that they need to have answered before too very long, before they grow to have those questions. What will they eat? What will they drink? What will they breathe? And so forth. To take the power of the Gospels and the sacramental tools and place it at the service of life instead of this abstracted thing called piety or holiness, whatever that is.
For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. The root of the word holy is the Greek word holos, which means whole or complete. Mary was articulating something far deeper than self-indulgent pieties. She was articulating that the name of God is whole. I am who am, being itself. The whole is the Mighty One, the all-powerful one of whom we are the many. Truly, the Mighty One did do great things for her. When I was reading this and we were talking about it, it dawned on me that in order to recognize this Mighty One, we have to be willing to be vulnerable and humble. And I think the hardest thing in the culture is that we're all encouraged to be mighty in our own right, to be strong, to have it all together, to be successful, to know what you're going to do with your life. And I think it's when we reach the failure of all that, in a sense, that we become vulnerable enough to not know what we're supposed to do, to not know even who we are, to not know what's going to happen next week or tomorrow. That in that vulnerability, when we're really open and not self-protective, when we're just being honest and genuine people, then God becomes this Mighty One, because we have this need for something greater than ourselves. As long as we're great, why would we need God? So again, I go back to this young girl who was so vulnerable and so needy and didn't know what would happen, had no idea that Joseph wouldn't reject her completely and she'd be left alone. And so for her to then realize the Mighty One has done great things for me is a model, I think, for all of us. It's in those moments when we really cry out from a sense of vulnerability that God comes on. Perhaps not in the way we had in mind, but in God's way.
Yeah, I think that's really a key to the need for surrender. If we know who we are, the one thing we can be sure of is we don't know who we are. If we know who we are, the one thing we can be assured of is we don't know who we are. And what does John the Baptist say? I'm the voice of one who cries in the wilderness. He doesn't trot out his accomplishments and, well, I'm the last of the New Testament, Old Testament prophets there, and I'm the announcer of the great one who's to come. He doesn't say that. He says, I'm the voice of one who cries in the wilderness. I thought of that as another name for a book, Crying in the Wilderness. With regard to Christian ecology, crying in the wilderness, weeping, in the sense of having a cover with somebody bent over, sobbing. The voice of one who cries in the wilderness makes straight the way. I think that's key, and I think there you come into contact with the most clear confrontation with a culture whose constant message is that you're supposed to have it all together, you're supposed to be powerful, you're supposed to have all this dominance, and it's the exact opposite of that. If you frequented this church here in Peterborough, at one time or another, you will have encountered Laura's mother, Gloria. And it's always interested me that her name is actually Gloria. Gloria in excelsis Deo. And here's this very quiet little woman who, in my life, made my ability to be here possible by offering Carol and I the most clear and sincere welcome to this church when we arrived here. Remember, we were straying around unchurched because I was too traumatized to return to the Catholic church. And we come to this place, and this person, and she's never stopped it. Every single Sunday, I still get the same welcome like it's the first time I came. And in my life, this person measures big inside of me because maybe I don't appear to be very vulnerable, like I'd be the person who would feel embarrassed about walking into the cafeteria alone. You know that feeling that everybody's in the cafeteria and they're all seated and you showed up alone because you were going with somebody else and they couldn't go? Now you got your tray, and you got your napkin and your glass of water, and you're looking around, and then somebody says, "Hey, Marilyn, come over here, we got one more seat." It's like, oh, thank you. There is a God. That's kind of what it was like for me. And she never got to the top of Microsoft. You know? And yet in my life, this person made a home for my heart. And it feels good to acknowledge that. Where are we? Number 5. His mercy is for those, I guess it says here, but I prefer on those. I don't like this particular translation completely. His mercy is on those who fear him from generation to generation. Jesus, the incarnate Christ Logos, has been called the incarnation of God's mercy. An honest reading of the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament provides justification enough for truly fearing God. But Mary was not talking about emotional fear or terror. What she meant was closer to the word awe. Awe is an inward response to the stunning presence and truth, the tenderness and mercy, the intimacy of the Mighty One, who is God. Mary, pregnant, is the very symbol of unitive spirituality, in that the presence of God was emerging within her very being. And of course, her being was also buried in the being of God. Any of you who've been around here enough, I've talked about the sponge in the water, you drop sponge in the water, and the sponge is in the water, but it's also true to say that water is in the sponge. Both are true. Well, it's like that. Here she is embedded and embodying, carrying this life which brought forth her. In a sense, God was pregnant with her, and she was pregnant with God. I am dictating this book to my pregnant daughter, Rebecca, who carries within her her first child, my first grandchild. Her mother, Carol's pregnancy was for Becky and for her sister. Both for Becky and for her sister, Kateri, were the supreme moments of my spiritual life. Through the mystical lens, no pregnancies are any less miraculous, any less divine than that of Mary. That's the great dignity that's brought to us by a religion that presents itself personally, through persons, to people. Not in the extinguishing of our individuality, but in the transcending of our individuality into a larger personal truth. And of course, when the babies were born, they were both born into my hands. And I've always had this hope that when I'm in a casket, that they set me in such a way that my hands are like this, because this was my womb. This was where I received the children into my hands, into my life. And throughout the pregnancy, at night, I would sing to them through Carol's belly. I would sing Blue Skies. Blue skies headed my way, nothing but blue skies today. And as they were coming out, I sang that song, and both of them came out smiling. They knew where they were coming to. Their expectation of their reception met their reception. Their reception met their expectation of their reception. Because we expect, we enter life with the expectation of love. And when that is in fact our experience, there is a fundamental satisfaction again that which was most critical as a need was met. And they both were smiling.
I just want to say something about terror, because I have a little bit of a different... I do agree that Mary is talking about awe, but I do think there's a place for fear and terror on the spiritual journey, and that in my life anyway, the terrors that I've had to face, that I've been so afraid to face, have actually shown a different face. And so I think she is pointing to something that is a holy terror, that there is this need to confront our own worst fears about ourselves, and that is part of our surrender to God, is that we not hold those back, that it is in dealing with those painful, shameful things that create our fear and our terror, that allows us to grow closer to God. And again, it's that vulnerability. So I just wanted to add that.
Well, before you go on, and it is that same terror and feeling imperfect and sinful that causes people to remain in a kind of divine loneliness and estrangement from their real destiny, because even while they wouldn't necessarily have the vocabulary to articulate it, the deep sense of corruption that frankly is marketed by the Christian establishment a whole lot, causes them to literally fear the exposing of that which feels corrupt or inferior and so forth. And like you use the word holy terror, I think that's what my mother called me.
He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. The scattering of the proud of thought and conceited is really the shattering of the false egoic self. As already noted, this scattering and shattering dynamic is the logical result of surrender. The avoidance of this dynamic leads to so many tragedies. Step 3 is the surrender step in all 12-step programs, such as that of Alcoholics Anonymous. The addict self must die, must shatter, for the real, the essential self to emerge. In John 3:30, the Baptist points to this in saying of himself in Jesus. He must grow greater, I must grow less. I think it's that shattering that happens when we face the terror. Because I think I had so much fear of letting go, of looking at those things that needed to be shattered and scattered in my past or in myself. And I think she's pointing to that he scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. We don't think with our hearts. We think up here. But the thoughts of our hearts are where the fear and the shame and the difficult feelings are going to us. And he scatters that if we are willing to let it, or if we're willing to surrender.
And first he shatters it, and the shattering is what we fear, and legitimately so. It's always fun. I'm going to get shattered and splattered and scattered, and wow,
less broken and shattered.
Then I will, then I'm going to have a divine self, and boy, I'm going to be everything will be fine after that. Well, it sounds good until you're actually in it, and wow, but certainly there's nothing else worth doing. So then we come to, he has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. As I write this book, we Americans grieve the passing of President Gerald Ford. President Ford, in his decency, his humility, was lifted up to the presidency of this great nation. The pride of the powerful pulled them down from office, leaving them humiliated for all time. And this was true not only for President Nixon, but for Vice President Agnew as well. Never elected to either office, Gerald Ford, this man of deep faith, found himself called to heal the divisions of the nation. These incidents are examples of what Mary was talking about, events that magnify the power of God. And I found myself, when President Ford died, I found myself really, really sad. I had a visceral, a bodily sorrow with his passing that I never felt for Reagan. But I really did feel for Jerry Ford. Because Jerry Ford, in my mind, is what the real Republican is. This kind of staid, conservative, honest, clear human being who is not without true concern for the poor, while at the same time maintaining the political tenets of the old Tory, the grand old party. And again, in this little parish, we're gifted with the presence of former Governor Walter Peterson, who, when I was a boy, when I first came into this church, I saw him sitting over there, and I knew him. I remembered him. When I was in my teens, he was the governor. And here again is that same, what I would consider incarnation of the real Republican, a person who has a set of principles, believes that they're the best way to go, but is not without an openness and a decency and a dignity that is tangible in his very being. And I miss those politics. I miss that kind of Republican Party. And during various times, I've been both a registered Republican, a registered Democrat, and a non-registered independent, whatever that, I don't know if you're registered or not, but a declared independent. I've been all of them, though I think I'm genetically Democratic. But I have crossed back and forth in deference to certain people, and he was one of them. And interestingly enough, he was an Episcopalian. And what what I find interesting about that is that Episcopalianism, when it's taken seriously, has the high Christian symbolism of Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but has the freedom of conscience and freedom of thought that we associate with the real truth of the Reformation, and offers us an opening to the future of Christianity that I think is the most hopeful. And I think really that's why I was shattered, scattered, and sent here. That I would never have made that change myself. I was too fearful of the voices that say, you can't leave here. You can't leave here, and especially to go there. Did I read my part right? He's brought down the low, so he has filled.
He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Greed leads the rich to attempt to fill their spiritual emptiness, not emptiness or sunyata in the Buddhist sense, with addictive substances and behaviors. Whether greed, power, pleasure, or intoxication, all and any such false gods lead eventually to the slavery of addiction. All addiction is like drinking seawater, cool and satisfying at first swallow. It soon becomes a burning rage in the body. It will lead in the end to madness and death. In third millennium Christianity, we must talk more about addiction and about the sin, the behaviors of addiction. If we need to be redeemed, and I myself did, it is from addiction and not from, quote, missing the mark, the Hebrew meaning of the word sin. More on that later. I just have one comment on this. He has filled the hungry with good things. I think it refers for me back to that hunger that I think Mary had to be an instrument of God. And I think that hunger, the desire to serve and to surrender is filled. When we're rich, whether it be financially or materially or even rich in the sense of we're doing well, we don't have that hunger. And therefore, we go away empty thinking we're doing really well because the desire for something deeper can't get through. And so, and it's really easy to do that. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm separate from that because I do it all the time. Get busy, and, get on a roll, and suddenly realize that, hey, wait a minute, there's that desire just so easily, it's like this little flame that is so easily just squelched out if I'm not paying attention.
I just had another experience of realization that he was taught by her. And that's not developed enough. I mean, when he starts talking about it is easier for a camel to go through the needle's eye, he's not talking about the eye of the needle. Dale will probably unpack that. There was a pass in the rocks called the eye of the needle, a very thin pass, and a camel couldn't fit through it because of the belly. And so he would say it would be easier to get the camel through the needle's eye than it is for a rich person to enter the kingdom of happiness, kingdom of God. And that's what she's saying there again. You know, you can really. When I was having a long conversation with Dale on the phone about how we perceive, because we're going to perceive something like this when we present, and I was saying, you know, if our subject matter is the Christ Logos, the presence of the creative mind of God throughout the universe, then when new meanings emerge in our midst, that's the expansion of the universe. That's what that is. The universe is actually expanding, and our understandings expand with them if we have achieved the openness that will enable that to take place. And so over and over again now, this is the third one, or fourth one, of this prayer that I've thought of before. And it goes right back. You can see that, in fact, in a sense, he was the son of the guru. He was the recipient of an understanding that was so profound.
He was the son of God, but she was the model for following God.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, she was the lens through which he moved in order to do that. As you make these connections and start really thinking about it, you begin to realize, and it's not figurative, it's not like a metaphor. This is the expansion of the universe. If he's Christ, if Christ is who John says he is, then as Christianity is turned inside out to bequeath new meanings, that is the expansion of the universe in the human. So our understandings become appropriate to what we need to know in order to allow life to go on to its next event, in other words, to expand. So we sit here with it, and you feel it when it's going on. There's a sense inside, there's this quickening, this feeling that at this point I live for. My whole day is spent with the attempt to allow that to be present while I still have time as much as possible, and to get as many ways of talking about that into print, because there's just nothing else. There's just nothing else. It is everything. So then it says, he helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever. The mission of the true Christian mystic. God, believe it or not, I didn't build what I say on what's here, but obviously it's the same person. So, the mission of the true Christian mystic is to expand the understanding or meaning of the words descendants of Abraham, certainly to all Jews and Muslims, but now to others as well. These others are his other folds that have to be under one shepherd. As mentioned earlier, the mission of modern Christian mystics is to discover the interior sentience present in all faiths. In this interiority, we experience the Christ logos in these others, and thus meet Christ in them. To be a, quote, missionary will now mean to go to other cultures and learn from them how to identify this interior sentience in their approach to the transcendent one, stage 4. Then, having done so, we return to our Christian communities to educate them as to how the Christ Logos is present in the other flocks of Christ. Put simply, we travel to others to learn rather than to teach. We return to our own in order to teach. It's a complete turning of that dynamic on its head and saying, instead of going out there trying to splash holy water on others, instead seeking the presence of Christ that is already there once we get past the differentiated exteriors and language of the different traditions. And so what I was talking about last time, there is the need for a confrontation of the Abrahamic religions by a son of Moses, well, let's put it this way, a son or daughter of Moses, a son or daughter of Yeshua, Jesus, a son or daughter of Mohammed. And the confrontation really must come from a prophetic proclamation that nobody within the fold of the Abrahamic monotheisms has the right to treat anyone else within those three, that triangle fold, with anything other than decency and understanding. There needs to be a prophetic confrontation of all three, by all three. In order for there to be a second stage prophetic confrontation of all three as one tradition, in the name of the Chinese tradition, which is Taoism, Confucianism, and so on, the Indian tradition, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jain, and so forth, and the indigenous peoples. For some strange reason, these three Abrahamic religions caught up in that fear-driven statement that if you leave this circle, you open yourself to evil and damnation. What must be understood is that is the voice of evil. That is the voice of evil. It's an attempt to control the evolution of the spirit within us in its need to be new in every century, to redefine. So at the end of the Bible, you'll come up against, at the end of the book of Revelation, there's this threat, and they speak in Jesus' name, that I am the Alpha, the Omega, and if anybody changes a word, and boom, you're going to get it. And that's present in all of the Abrahamic truths. The Jews are the most tolerant. They tolerate atheism in their midst and all of that. You can be an atheist and still be a Jew and not be condescended to. But boy, that's not the case in Islam. And all three have had this aggressive desert red ant tendency toward one another. And this has got to be confronted with legitimate moral authority and changed so that we can move into the future with what the Spirit is telling us. Remember that other foursome we did? We're one ecologically, we're one economically, we're one technologically, and we're medieval spiritually. We're still blowing each other into hamburger about the nature of God. So I think we'll end the talk part. We've got a few minutes to open it for discussion if that's appropriate, but we'll end the talk part by reading it one more time. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely, from now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is on those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown the strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham, and to his descendants forever. Amen. Okay, would you like to talk?
I also, like Carolyn Moses, Mary is very close to my heart and has been a spirit guide, and I have experienced, felt her presence. And of course, being a woman, I need the feminine. There's just too much masculine. And as I read this and I think about this, and think about Christ becoming human being, he has to come through the female body because that is how earth and nature works. So who is this person that is qualified to be that mother, to be that presence for him to birth through, has got to be at least as divine as he is. You know, so it's not just physical purity and mental purity and, you know, pure of heart. She is as divine as he is, as I contemplate this. And that she is God in the feminine, and he's God in the masculine. And part of it is cultural that he stands out, because there can only be a man's voice and anybody will listen to it in this place. But in the feminine masculine dynamic, the feminine is passive. So she would be quiet and receptive and giving. And he would be the one who would go out in the world. But I see them as partners isn't quite the right word, but one and the same, but just manifested differently in the world.
Yeah, and that insight is where Catholicism has wrestled with things like the Immaculate Conception, the idea that she must have been conceived without sin, and the Protestants get all upset because only Jesus has been conceived without sin. You can't have a woman conceived without sin. And then it gets theologically kind of cuckoo, where all this stuff starts getting argued back and forth and put into creedal forms, schisms, and on it goes. We see another one taking place even as we speak, another schism in the Episcopal community, because it becomes so divisive to go cognitive. But that is what all that wrestling is about with the Immaculate Conception, is that very insight. Don't dare say that she was co-equal with the divine child Christ, because that's the kind of thing that can really get you slammed on. But of course, it's true. And the very point of his message is to show that divinity within her took root. Her love and longing was such that God took root in her longing. And we have that same ability. That's exactly why he says, you marvel at what I do. You'll do greater things than that. So in whatever way we conceive, we have the ability to have God take root in us. That's the Christ likeness. How wonderful. Anything else? We're certainly in an home. Just feel it. I was writing about the new book, The Gospel of John. I'm working on it now. And I was talking about, people find it so hard to hear the Om. That the Hindus insist that there is this Om. And it dawned on me when I was meditating the other day in front of the window that first of all, it's not necessarily audible to begin with. It's a sensation in the body, an intuitive sensation of oneness. But it is audible in the trees. We hear them.
It's a vibration.
The wind, we hear it in the falling rain. We hear it if we're far enough from the ocean for the individual breaking of the waves to become a single solitary. The whole planet is only. In us, it's an intuitive sensation. And it's when we're really riveted in truth. When we're really present in truth. That's all. Yes? And then we'll go ahead.
Just another one of those little realizations I had while the two of you were talking was continuing to, if we look at the birth mystically, that there is no time and that we are that same spirit, then we too were being birthed by Mary as Jesus at that time. In a sense, she is also our mother.
Yes.
And I just had a moment of experiential being born again, but in that moment, going back there.
The universe expanded you. Because some part of the universe has expanded into a new understanding. That's beautiful. That really is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a realized thought. There's a difference. It's not just cognitive thinking, it's realized thought.
Well, all while talking, I was remembering a dream that I had when I was just recently out of college and wondering what to do and which way to go. And there were some things in it, just one of being in a church, taking a test, and having to know what all the rules were, and I couldn't do it. And I remember standing up in the middle and saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going home. And I took a taxi that took me through this very sort of crooked streets of this little village that Belmont always reminds me of it, like when I've ever seen it. And I looked across the river and I saw this beautiful city. It was just like golden and glowing. And I said, there it is. There's my home. And I think that dream really helped me. That through a hard time, I feel you must do this, you must do this, you must do this, into seeing something bigger.
Yeah. That really echoes with the yonder shore teachings in Buddhism, that we have to cross over. You have to take the raft, which is what religion is, to cross over to the yonder shore. But once you're on the yonder shore, you don't need the raft because you're there. You can let go. You didn't notice it, but I was in that room too. I took the test and flunked it. I walked right out behind you. Flunked it miserably. Anybody else? It's worked out nicely in terms of time. You know? Give us another one.
Just again, in listening, just another thought that came to me. Actually, a deeper understanding from one of those teachings that I got a long time ago, but I knew I didn't get it. You know, that different understanding and realization. I understood it, but it didn't.
Right. There's a difference.
It was empty. It wasn't full of meaning. And the teaching was along the lines of, time isn't a line; it's a sphere within spheres. And I've been playing around with what does that mean? And of course, in here we talk about riding the edge of the bubble as it expands and that sort of thing. But as I was talking about that moment of us being born too, with Jesus, in that moment, it became apparent to me what that means of a sphere within spheres, because every time the sphere gets larger, it contains every other sphere within it. It is the whole history of the universe is coexistent with this moment right now, within us, within this moment. And as each of us have that new meaning and it gets a little larger, well, everything it just was is now contained within that. The whole thing is homing and humming and present now.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why with the term space-time continuum, the reason space and time are the same thing is because the distance from one sphere to the next sphere is both duration, the time it takes, and the distance from this one. So it's a space-time continuum. Instead of, when I realized that at one point, I had a lot of hair, and now look at me now. It was just overwhelming. Yeah. And what you created, that was like a magnificent computer image. Yeah. All of them translucent, but just transparent, but just enough to see the ones that are contained Wow. We were in a big group tonight, but we had a big meeting. Yeah, this was one that you can all suffer insomnia with me this time. I always go home so energized that it's really hard to come back down. I was counseling. I reopened a counseling practice of sorts in my own house. It's called God Talk East and West, and I will only be working with people in advanced spirituality. There'll be no mental health counseling, there'll be no addiction counseling, none of that. Though those issues may show up, it's not focused on that. It's going to be strictly for people who really want to take spirituality into a realized state. And I'll be putting that out there. I had my first clients last week, and I'm just going to do 2 or 3 hours a week, and that's all. But we meditate together and then work through stuff. Yeah, it's a real description of the expansion of the soul too, because the soul is the egoic understanding that limits the experiential truth of the soul. They're not limited. Yes, another one.
This is just more of a curiosity, but it's fun during the Olympics to reflect on how the world record 10 years ago everyone can run today. It's the same sort of, it just takes someone, this was said to me recently, it just takes someone realizing that it was easy to break the 4-minute mile, and then next year everyone can. It's just those
and that knowing is larger than the individual who conceives it.
Yeah.
So in a very real sense, the entire universe has been altered tonight. Just in our little group gathered together, considering these meanings and letting them dawn on us.
The image that you're talking about is actually, I think, what the iconography of Mary tries to point to, because she is the container. It's this little God inside her. I've always thought of the feminine as the container, and the masculine container.
Yeah, see, that's in the Eastern tradition. Theotokos, Mother of God. Why don't we all just step over here? Can you see? Oh no, because it's dark, you can't see it.
The morning's
Yeah, the morning sky. So this beautiful Mary window over here. One of the things I noticed contemplating her is that there are, you can't see anything right now, is that there are 7 angels surrounding her. And 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 1 here.
And 7 stars.
And 7 stars. Those are the chakras. That's what they are. They're a residual, iconographic statement about the union of the Christian tradition with the other Eastern traditions. It's also, they're also contained in the book of Revelation, where he says, I saw 7 churches that had 7 candlesticks and 7 candles. And that's the same thing again. Those are the chakras. And they play out in Christianity in a muted way, largely because it's an Eastern realization in Jesus of Nazareth funneled through Western philosophy. Where it goes the other direction, like into Orthodoxy, then you get that spherical thing with the little baby Christ at the core and these massive Marys.
Well, you can even see that on all the stained glass windows here, because as I sit in the choir, I contemplate them quite a bit. I think to look at them more easily than people just looking straight ahead. And you see, of course, the construction, but the stained glass windows are all medallions, and some are round, and some are oval, and some are flowered. But that whole picture of the room that holds every picture in all the windows that we have here.
This is a
And
beautiful
so,
place.
It's too bad we just don't have time to just sit and contemplate that. because they're really, they have a lot of meaning that you don't even need to know it all intellectually, but the conversation is kind of learning that.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's how the message was passed. That's the purpose of stained glass windows, was to teach the story to those who couldn't read. So they have the story in window form. But this place, for those of you who are experiencing this with Christ logos on the website, the place we're talking about is a little church in Peterborough, New Hampshire, called All Saints. And I think the best description of this place would be that it has the delicacy and quaintness of a music box and the grandeur of a cathedral somehow blended together in this magnificent experiment in proportion and beauty, just out and out beauty. So if you're ever in the area on the Wednesday night that we do this, please feel welcome to come.
And you can come here during the day too.
Yeah, and it's a blaze during the day. Yeah, it's been a blaze less this summer because it rains every day, but it's usually a blaze most of the day. Frequently it looks like this at 3 in the afternoon. Okay, so now we'll do a brief meditation and take this with us. I'm reminding you again of the contribution box. I don't know where you put it.
It's when you exit, it's on the right.
That in order to have informed consent, again, this week it will be to help with Dale Allen Hoffman getting here and getting back home this week and next week when he's here. Next month, I mean. I always say that.
You do.
I always say that. Just translate it.
I just like to hear it.
Yeah.
Way Carol.
Which is why I look so beleaguered.
Doing that.
It's so wounding. And I had 2 other women at home that joined in with her. And since midnight, now we only have a female dog. My little Annie, who has become the love of my life. I really have come to love this little dog. I wasn't all that fond of her. Okay. Getting done. So why don't we use Evan's image of a sequence of spheres, each of which contain all the ones before it, and think of ourselves pregnant